Sara Duterte are still going around Mindanao to woo voters.
The campaign team of Manila Mayor Isko Moreno is now in Misamis Oriental.
Presidential aspirant Ping Lacson says his camp has no issues with campaign funding, even after he exited his former party, Partido Reforma.
Yung fundraising namin na ginawa, sa akin din naman nanggaling from my contributors, yung mga dating kaibigan, mga bagong kaibigan, saka yung mga believers. So instead of the party subsidizing my campaign and the campaign of my senatorial candidates, in fact, natulungan ko na yung mga senatorial candidates.
Shifting alliances and political affiliations are leading to new teams and combinations of candidates. What will be the scenario in the final weeks leading to the elections? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Please stay tuned. We will be joined by the other chiefs when we return. Welcome to The Chiefs. Ako po si Robbie Alampay. Kasama po natin online sa Quezon City, Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5. And kasama natin sa Mandaluyong, Ed Lingao of One News. At maya-maya, I think hahabol pa mamaya si Ami Pamintuan ng Philippine Star. In the meantime, Ed, ano bang mga nabantayan mo this weekend?
Well, bukas tataas ang presyo ng gasolina ulit.
Ang ganda naman ng papungan natin. Happy Monday!
8 pesos at mahigit 3 piso diesel tsaka gasolina.
Okay.
So we have a swing.
Ibala libre naman MRT.
Yun. Libre ang
now.
MRT. Tsaka, kasi pinapatesting nila, kasi bagong rehabilitate din yung mga relays, particularly ng MRT Line 3, di ba?
Yes.
But speaking of the weekend, you were referring to the weekend. We've seen some people jumping alliances and forming new ones across the political divide. Merong
Misamis.
may tumalon sa Misamis, yung mga Uy, Juliet Uy, pero in their case it was for Robredo and Sara Duterte.
Yung Rosa na tinatawag.
Tapos yung Bohol team naman ng Reforma, they're staying with Lacson instead of going with Reforma. So may mga ganoon. Tapos from what I understand, yung senatorial balls ni Ping Lacson, they're staying with Reforma but they're campaigning for Ping.
Oo nga.
Yes.
So
Staying with him. Yeah.
medyo lusaw talaga mga partido.
Pero si Congressman Barzaga, nakakagulat din.
Cavite,
diba?
Dasmariñas.
Sa Cavite, Dasmariñas.
diba?
Malaki-laking syudad yan sa
Yeah.
Cavite. Di ba?
That's
Tsaka
probably one of the
NUP.
bigger, Yeah. NUP
Nagkuwalis
president.
sa ano yun
He's the president of NUP, which has thrown its support behind BBM and Sara.
Sige, ibato nyo pa lahat ng kagulo. Paggulo natin pagulo. Kasi yung guest natin, siya pupulot yan. Tsaka siya mag-aayos
Siya yung
yan.
magtatagpi-tagpi.
Diba? Guluhin nyo ng guluhin.
Parang domino ba?
Tapos tingnan natin kung anong magagawa nyo doon sa eksena niya. Hindi, but joining us to try to make sense of everything, because so far we haven't made any sense of anything. We're just counting down the
we're
news
making a list of
items we're
everything for you
covering.
guys.
Joining us is political scientist and columnist Richard Heydarian. Good evening, Mr. Heydarian.
Good evening, Richard.
Hi, sir. Ganda gabi.
Ganon. Pwede ba, Prof, pwede ba kayong mag-ayos nito? Parang ang dami na naming binato doon sa eksena. Ikaw nga mag-compose nito.
Kumbaga sa Mahjong,
Ano
Ano bang ano bang basa mo dito?
Well, I mean, first of all, surprise, surprise, no? It's not like hindi tayo sanay sa ganitong klase ng politika, especially in the final stretch, no? So pumapasok na tayo sa final stretch of the race. And I think this is where makikita na natin saan tataya, no? Yung mga ating mga politiko, saan mga tao. And then also dito nakikita natin na lubos yung pagbigay ng support, especially mga volunteers, no, yung passionate base ng iba't ibang candidates. We kind of clearly see that with the side, for instance, of Vice President Leni Robredo, na grabe yung mga dami nilang grand rallies, ang dami mga volunteers na lumalabas from the north to the south, from Davao, Isabela, Caloocan, Pasig, etc. But also, of course, ito rin, nakikita natin yung epekto na yung absence ng real political parties sa Philippines at saka yung walang clear ideological fault lines. So nakikita natin there are people who are okay with Sara Duterte as their vice presidential candidate, but they kind of like someone else as their presidential candidate. Whether may Rosa, may Isa, whether with Isko, with Lenin, or of course the unity with Bongbong Marcos. And the last thing I want to emphasize just for our discussion, just to get the ball started, is dito rin nakikita natin na may parang may gap because the survey suggests that we have a very, very clear front runner in ways that we haven't had in a long time. And yet, pag titignan mo naman yung alignments or realignments at saka yung kaguluhan, parang it doesn't reflect it because we see a lot of survivalists, traditional politicians. Mga
Exactly. Kasi,
they're not going with the front runner. They're going against the front runner. So this is what's really interesting to me.
Exactly. In other words, sinasabi nyo, Prof, na hindi naman niyang kakampi ng basta-basta lang. Hindi naman niyang kakampi ng basta-bastang prinsipyo lang. Siyempre naman, meron niyang kalkulasyon.
Exactly. I mean, believe ako sa mga politiko pagdating na reading the pulse of the people. Siyempre, mga survivalist ang mga politiko sa ating bansa kasi wala nga real political parties. And it's really about, parang magaganong ka, where's the wind going?
Reading the wind.
Teka. So, yeah, one more one, no? You were saying, no, na hindi ka na surpresa. So let's talk about yung kay Alvarez na biglang, di ba, biglang tinalikuran si Ping Lacson at pumanig kay Leni. Ano yun? Was that a move in favor of the flow of people now, of supporters for Leni? Yun ba yun? Clearly.
Yeah, so for instance, yung let's just call it this way, disintegration of the supposed admin side, no? On one hand, meron tayong mga tao na for instance, Representative Salceda and then a number of people from Cagayan de Oro and Mindanao. Ito yung mga tao na hindi komportable sa mga Marcoses to be potentially the next president, but they like Sara Duterte. But you have also people like, for instance, Congressman Alvarez, na alam natin may hidwaan with Sara Duterte, na meron din silang competition, rivalry. So iba naman yung sa kanila. They really like completely another alternative. So maybe they're more comfortable with the Soto, Senator Soto and Leni Robredo kind of team up. So we see different kinds of defection happening. And then may mga ibang tao talaga siguro na ang basa nila, maybe it's a question of momentum. And just like in 2016, maybe Leni was a slow starter, but maybe she can significantly pick up towards the end. Ito lang sasabihin ko, what surveys cannot capture is yung actual number ng soft voters. So, I think to a certain degree, tama talaga yung surveys in terms of capturing overall momentum. Pero marami dyan sinasabi nila, second preference nila to or third preference nila to. But sa totoo lang, they can change their mind radically come election day. Marami dyan bandwagoners. No? I think, I won't be surprised up to 40% ng ating electorate could radically change their mind in the coming weeks and so. And again, this is not to be prejudicial to younger generation. Alam ko kami millennials, binabash parati na wala kaming sense of history and all. But let's not forget, there'll be 4 million Gen Z, no? Yung mga sobrang mga first-time voters na pumapasok and they're beginning to feel the field, they're beginning to feel ano yung politika natin. I think they're open. I think a lot of them are undecided. Maybe their preference now is this candidate, but I think they can radically change that depending on the performance of different candidates in the final stretch. But dito talaga, Luchi, nakikita natin na volunteers are making a big difference. Defections within the ranks of some of the big parties is making a big difference. And I believe the bandwagoners and new voters could also make a big difference in the coming weeks. No? Kaya hindi pa tapos ang laban. There's nothing definitive or predetermined about this.
Pero sir, these are pragmatists. You're talking about veteran politicians who read the wind. These are the real wind talkers. Ang hindi ko magets ganun with the numbers we have so far, and we haven't seen the latest yet, and I would suppose that they would wait dapat for the newer numbers before they cast their lot with somebody who's gotten 15 versus somebody who's gotten 60. Diba? Doesn't that run against political wisdom?
Instincts.
Logic.
Yeah, dito sinabi ko, Ed, no, maybe there's something they know that we don't know. Maybe there's some other survey, focus group discussion surveys na ginawa na hindi public. I won't be surprised. There are a lot of them that are showing shift in momentum. At the same time, a lot of the surveys are not capturing, especially mga authoritative surveys. For instance, yung Pulse Asia covered niya hanggang third week of February, no? So hindi niya kinover yung last 3 weeks na ang dami nangyari in the last 3 weeks, right? As I said nga, surveys also do not cover yung mga bandwagoners, very soft voters na parang kahit yung first choice nila, baka hindi lang talaga first choice.
Pero sir, even with the second choice, right? So, yes sir.
I think that politicians, they're sensing a lot of this fluidity on the ground na hindi natin nakikita in some of the public surveys, which indicate tapos na dapat ang laban, sobrang laki ng agwat dapat.
Yes sir, but even with the second choices in the surveys, number one second choice is Isko. I think Lenny Robredo comes in number 3 among the second choices. So
or fourth, actually. Yeah, I think
that's
one.
a
Yes,
bit
exactly.
further down.
Although sa Okta, umakyat siya, she's now the second choice among second choices. Di ba? But she did come from last.
From last, yeah.
Di ba? Tapos naging, I think it still is ko, and then siya.
Right, but yung nga, point ko, is the second choice really the second choice? At the same time, for instance, if you look at the Okta research, I think December last year, it was showing that, for instance, the front runner, more than 50% ay pwede pa rin magbago ng isip. As tingin ko, it's actually probably more than that. It could be 60%, 70%. But it also applies to other candidates. Now, I know Isko is staying in this race because he's really betting on the second preference shift. Ganon din kay Soto, no? If you look at Senator Soto's second preference, I think 40% na abot eh. Ang laki eh. But let's not also forget, at the end of the day, walang first runner-up dito, isa lang mananalo. So you don't become president by being the first. So I think this is where it gets very interesting.
Prof, I want to know your thoughts also on the other side of this. No? So their survivalist instincts, as you said, they may know something that we haven't seen yet, and maybe that's what's pushing them to change sides or at least consider other candidates. But from the perspective naman ngayon nung kumakandidato, no, nung tumatakbo for presidente, pagka may nakuha ka dito sa Pilipinas na endorsement ng mayor, ng any kind of local politician on the local level, what does that mean for your campaign?
Of course, hindi pare-pareho, no? Depende sa anong mga locations ang pinag-usapan natin. At the same time, pwede natin masabi na in some areas of the Philippines, malaki yung endorsement factor, malaki yung block voting on the ground. It may not be 100% or 80% or 70%, but if it's large enough, it can make a difference. And for me, Mindanao is really an important place. I mean, of course, I have an Ilocano background, so everyone talks about solid north, but I think the solid south is actually more coherent as a so-called voting bloc. And dito nakita natin, we have a problem. In a sense that Sara Duterte, at least officially, is with Bongbong Marcos, but the father, the current president, happy birthday kay Pangulong Duterte, hindi pa siya tumaya dito, And then we see some members of PDP Laban, no, actually going for Robredo or suggesting that President Duterte is softly endorsing Robredo. But the very fact that President Duterte is not endorsing the front runner who's supposed to be the admin, I think it's the wild card in itself. Kasi sa aking paniwala, President Duterte may not have as much endorsement power towards the end of the race, let's say in Manila, in Luzon, in Visayas, but I think in Mindanao, President Duterte can still make a big difference. If ever he goes with someone who is not part of the unit team, but rather from the other side. And President Duterte is a very unpredictable person. So I won't rule out some interesting, let's say, April surprise, the same way na meron tayong October surprise sa American election. But again, these are all speculative. At the end of the day, we might just end up with exactly what surveys have been suggesting and President Duterte going with the safest bet. But I think at this point, there's a lot of fluidity that makes this race suddenly very exciting. Kasi I think earlier this year, medyo parang hindi ganun ka-competitive, hindi ganun ka-exciting yung race. But now, suddenly, parang iba yung...
Yeah.
Iba eh.
Yeah. Yung sinasabi mong bandwagoners, no? Naku-curious ako, anong mga binabantayan itong bandwagoners na to? Is it, the number of people, kung gaano ka-mammoth na mga rally? Is it
Right.
social media? What are the factors that they're watching out for to make their decision? I mean,
Right.
and what the from team to team. Yeah.
Right. Ang maganda tanong niya, actually, this is more political sociology and psychology. Ako, for me, there's a cool factor is very important, especially for Gen Z among others. If you exude confidence, you exude yung qualities of a leader, someone who makes you feel comfortable. So dito sa tingin ko, mahalaga yung ginagawa mo on social media, projection, but also during debates. Kaya nga, malaking debate ngayon is whether yung absence of some of candidates in some of the major debates is hurting them or not. Surveys so far are not showing them. But I think this is where it creates an opening for other candidates. So nakikita natin, for instance, with Lenny, with Isko, some of the other candidates, they're constantly present in debates. And with the Lenny especially, we see also this massive, massive outpouring of people, which grabs attention. Kasi tayo, mga pundits, mga journalists, tinitignan natin yung surveys, yung second preference, yung mga technicalities, ganun. But I think for a lot of first-time voters, for a lot of people who are not walang exact ideological leanings, gusto nila tumaya dun sa panalo or whichever side has the momentum. So if, for instance, Lenny can project strength and momentum with those grand rallies, I think this could convince a lot of these so-called bandwagoners to shift in a certain direction or not. Yun lang, sa tingin ko, you need more qualitative studies, focus group discussions to really capture itong bandwagoner numbers and their psychology. Na feeling ko hindi masyado na-capture ng very limited quantitative studies and data na meron tayo, especially in public, no? So in that way...
So yung winnability, yeah. So yung winnability as a factor, ang lakas pa rin, no? I mean, it's a sad reality, but
Lucy,
I think it's stronger than ever. Am I right? Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, may delay minsan. Yeah, it comes
sorry.
up as if I'm cutting into you. For instance, may mga tao na they're for Rosa, no? So they want Lenny and then they want Sara Duterte, right? And if you ask them, bakit ganon? Sabi na, well, at least baka yung isa manalo. I mean, yung sense na at least dun sa ticket mo may isa manalo para hindi ka feeling natalo. You know what I'm saying? I think there's that sense. With a lot of voters just playing safe, no? Now, even though ang layo ng dalawang yung candidates, but they're willing to bet. And we have seen this in the past. We had the Noybi, for instance, right? With Noy and Binay before, no? So I think this tendency of voters has not been studied or emphasized enough.
Yeah, but Prof,
but I think inability is a factor. And what they define as winnability could also change depending on yung mga nakikita nila online, on surveys, among others.
No, but
Yes, Rob.
Prof, I just wanna yung yung Rosa, for that matter, yung Noybi, mga nakita natin ganyan, and you're giving us how would voters look at that as an option for them. But let's not kid ourselves. These are not organic things. May pinanggagalingan niyang Rosa. I mean, unless you would disagree, but my sense is, and a lot of people sense is, in fact, a lot of people immediately ask, who's behind this? Diba? And I want to ask you also, not only who's behind this, but what's behind that? From the perspective of politicians, why would they initiate these kinds of combinations?
Well, I think, you can interview Congressman Salceda. I think he can tell us a lot about what's going on kasi sila yung nag-launch recently at yung press conference about Rosa and all. Well, I mean, ako jokingly a few months ago, sabi ko, what if manalo yung dalawang babae, di ba? I mean, and I wanted to get just to solicit response. Ako naman, Robbie, I mean, yes, there could be agenda by certain groups. They may have certain alignments na gusto nila. Pero dapat may appeal din yung alignments na yan. Eh. Because you can think about 1,000 different permutations. Bakit Rosa lang? Or bakit isa? Or bakit nag-click more ang Rosa ngayon kaysa isa, no? So as much as, yes, there may be some vested interests or groups or agenda-driven movements here, I think it's also a question of appeal to the public. It's also about yung receptiveness. So tama, Robbie, there is a supply side, kumbaga sinong behind it, but we also have to look at the demand side. Kaya gusto ko yung yung tanong ni Lucy because she was also asking, ano yung mga nag-i-impress sa mga tao, especially yung mga pwede pa magbago ng isip. And this is where I think we can have more interesting discussions about this fluidity of this race. And let's see also, I mean, in Mindanao, for instance, remember, there's also many negative memories of the Marcos martial law years, dictatorship years. There are many Mindanaos who are not very comfortable, perhaps, with another Marcos coming back, no? And nakita natin in 2016, Lenny did quite good in Mindanao, di ba?
Yeah.
And Bongbong didn't do as well, and that was really an important thing na nag-determine yung razor-thin victory ng duly elected Vice President Lenny Robredo. But Lenny now is actually underperforming in Mindanao, and Bongbong Marcos is overperforming. And let me put it this way, speaking of bandwagon, let's not forget, Bongbong Marcos was 13% and number 3 in the second quarter, of last year sa Pulse Asia. And then he jumps from 13 to 53, right? He's benefiting from bandwagon. But my point is the bandwagon can cut both ways. And a huge part of that bandwagon, Robbie and Lucci, was Mindanao. So for instance, if you look at some of the numbers, ang numbers na among Waray was higher than Tagalog, for instance, right? Who are more familiar supposedly or more friendly towards the Marcoses. And I think a lot of people in Mindanao, for instance, can still reconsider their options if people who are close to Sara may have a different preference for president. And I think a part of that also is yung legacy ng martial law, which was the darkest in actually Mindanao. If you look at it objectively, yung conflict na nangyari, yung mga abuso na nangyari, grabe. And as I said, BBM didn't do very well in 2016. So this is not a solid vote. It's a very soft vote, and it's a bandwagon vote so far preference, which pushed up BBM in the numbers. But bandwagon cuts both ways. It could also reverse. So ang challenge ngayon for other candidates, whether it's Isa of Isko or Rosa, for those who want Lenny, then the challenge is how to parang convert into voting preference, yung mga reservations that some politicians or folks have there in Mindanao. I think that's really the challenge. And the other thing I want to emphasize is this. There's also a sense that the vice presidential mates of Lenny and Isko perhaps are not strong enough. Therefore, they're pushing for Sara, who seems to have more of the stars aligned for her. So if you look at it, mukhang Sara actually has a much more solid base of support than Marcos in a way. But this is not surprising because Sara used to be the number 1, right? Dun sa mga pre-election surveys. So I think this explains why Sara is the constant element, Isa, Rosa, Unity. But the presidential bets shifts is also because of the perceived weaknesses ng vice presidential mates ng ibang presidential candidates who may be comfortable with having Sara as their unofficial or indirect katandem. But then again, this also shows gaano ka ang gulo ng politika natin kasi wala talaga tayong real political parties. Unlike sa America, which is not necessarily the best country when it comes to democracy, but at least dyan, klaro yung ticket eh. Kung sino yung presidential candidate, may automatic na vice presidential candidate. Wala naman tayo dito, kaya dyan nangyayaring horse trading. And next level yung horse trading nangyayari ngayon. But Sara seems to be the constant element in all of these crisscrossing realignments. So that tells you that I think a lot of politicians feel Sara has a much more solid base than the current front runner for the presidential race, for instance.
I want to take your take focusing on the developments in Mindanao over the weekend, particularly nangyari dito sa Misamis. Congresswoman Juliet Uy used to be really supporting the BBM, officially now shifting to Lenny, along with, if the reports are accurate, along with at least 11 incumbent mayoral candidates. Alongside that, you look at CDO, rival candidates, both endorsing. You have Oscar Moreno, you have Rufus Rodriguez. The Cagayan-Iligan Corridor, we keep referring to Mindanao. Every time we talk about Mindanao, we look at Davao, and we look at the Dutertes, and so on. And then all of a sudden this weekend, let's not forget the Cagayan-Iligan Corridor, diba? And these major cities. What do you see happening in Mindanao?
Well, dito rin nakikita natin na within the so-called solid South, there are actually internal rivalries and all. We already saw that a little bit with Alvarez and Sara back in the day. I mean, the Hukbong and all of that movement, I think, created this impression na very coherent yung solid South movement. But I think Mindanao overall is solidly behind the Dutertes. So Sara, that's why I think she can hold on to her very strong numbers in Mindanao. But clearly, yung mga internal divisions na meron sa Mindanao na hindi natin nakikita masyado in 2019 elections ay lumalabas ngayon pagdating sa alignments for the presidential candidates. And you're absolutely right. We tend to think a lot about Davao kind of as the representation of Mindanao politics, but actually you have other centers of power and other political families and figures na hindi named Duterte. So I think this is something that we're doing. Kaya para sa akin, 2019 and 2022 is a crash course on Mindanao politics. I won't pretend to be a knowledgeable person on the nitty-gritties of Mindanao politics, pero base sa my visits to Mindanao, my talks at Ateneo de Davao, and my interaction with people on the ground, grabe, very fluid then on the ground. But as I said, it looks like those fragmentation are not hurting Sara, but they could hurt the current front-runner for the presidential run. That's why I think some people, the more pragmatist or realpolitik people, whether in the Isko camp, in the Lenny camp, etc., are thinking, why not we do some crossover here? Maybe that can help us to push up our numbers in Mindanao. Kasi ang baba na numbers ni Isko and Lenny, I mean, we're in single digits while Bongbong Marcos is like 70% or more than 70%. But yun nga, a lot of that is soft. A lot of that can actually fragment for the presidential race. And for us, we're beginning to learn more and more also about Mindanao politics. But the last thing I want to emphasize this is here. I think if President Duterte endorsed BBM, I don't think mangyayari yung ganito So I think a lot of them na-sense nila that President Duterte might have other preferences. So I think they're trying to guess that, or it makes them feel comfortable enough not to fully endorse the whole unit team.
But
So
you
you
have Sara.
pag-vaccinate
President
na.
Duterte came out and said BBM ako, medyo malabo para sa akin na all of it will see this level of fragmentation. Yun lang sense ko Kasi may division din within the House of Duterte, di ba?
Yes, sir.
So I think that
Yes,
is
sir.
what also other Mindanao political figures are
But
sensing.
Sara is the candidate, and we know who Sara is friends with. Sara is a very good friend of Amy Marcos. And the president is not a candidate himself. So, hindi ba maitatawid ni Sara na si Bongbong ang suporta ng Mindanao?
Well, I mean, let's put it this way. I mean, one of the things that I've been emphasizing over the past year or so is that I think, yes, some say there's a Duterte Marcos axis and all of that, but let's not forget there's going to be also rivalry here, right? I mean, and I think both sides know there's a rivalry here. And alam natin, if Sara ran for the president, most likely Bongbong wouldn't have run. And alam din natin, Bongbong Marcos wouldn't have been so dominant in this race had it not been for Sara deciding to go to the vice presidential race. So my sense is there are also some internal rivalries there. Not to mention, I think President Duterte also a few months ago in one of his interviews with one of the YouTubers, right? Minention niya na he felt his daughter was kind of cajoled and coaxed into not running. So medyo may resentment din si Paolo Duterte mukhang saan nangyari dito sa final lineup of unit team. So that's what I'm saying. I think a lot of politicians in Mindanao, among others, are looking at those internal tensions, and based on that, they feel comfortable enough to go in other direction. And at the same time, I'm not sure Sara Duterte has strongly come out and condemned these alternatives. No, ayoko yung Isa Rosa na yan. Dito talaga ako 100% kay Bongbong Marcos. I'm not sure. Maybe it has happened, but I haven't seen that. So I think there's some signals being sent that bukas kami in terms of crossover endorsements. But just like Noibi, crossover na nangyari noong 2010, I don't expect na i-own ng mga candidates mismo openly. I think officially everyone's going to stick with their tandem, but the real game, I think, is the unofficial crossovers. And I think a lot of that is also going to be in Mindanao. But as I said, what happens in Mindanao has a multiplier effect. Because once Mindanao shifts in favor of one candidate, we can see, or if it fragments bigla, it can have a huge impact dun sa overall rankings. And I think once that happens, it could also have a ripple effect dun sa mga ibang undecided who are also looking at who's winnable. So in short, yes, Mindanao is not majority of the vote. In fact, it's barely even a large plurality of the votes. But because of its coherence behind Duterte's, but non-coherence behind the presidential candidates, could have a multiplier effect, a ripple effect that could, cascade across the country. Kaya nga, lahat kami ngayon nakatutok dyan sa Mindanao At saka, anong gagawin ni Pangulong Duterte? And his non-endorsement so far, I think, also speaks a lot.
Yeah.
Wait, what about Manny Pacquiao? You didn't even mention him. I mean, it used to be that we all thought, nako, yan ang bailiwick ni Manny Pacquiao, di ba? And at the very least, he would divide the votes there. Is he still a strong factor?
Honestly, I was thinking there could be kind of a Bongo Pacquiao, let's just call it, let's say, wall or something like that. If ever all of them ran, no. But for some reason, it didn't happen, right? So Bongo is from Mindanao, and yet initially when he was in the race, the surveys were not reflecting a very strong alignment behind Bongo. No, Pacquiao also is the other surprising one. We were expecting Pacquiao as the son of the Mindanao to do much better, and yet it's also not happening. So I think these are things that we have to dapat pag-aralan natin mabuti. But I think that is where you see the Duterte effect still stronger. But the fact that Duterte, the House of Duterte itself, is not fully united behind the presidential candidate, but of course clearly for the vice presidential candidate, that's why we have fluidity. My sense, though, if President Duterte and Sara, both of them were clearly for one presidential candidate, we wouldn't have seen a lot of these defections and all. But precisely because of the absence of that, we're seeing these defections and all. And let's see. I mean, again, I'm not sure about anything. I don't want to preempt Senator Pacquiao or anything like that, but there are a lot of general discussion. What if Pacquiao withdraws? Kasi alam natin, walang runoff election sa atin. So wala nang chance to have a coalition building up after first round. Kasi yun po yung nangyari sa ibang bansa eh. For instance, if you were in Peru or Chile, they would have a completely different president now kung wala silang runoff elections. The right-wing candidates would have won. Whether the daughter of Fujimori, the former dictator of Peru, or yung partisan, yung fanboy ni Peron, no, yung dictator ng Chile, both of them lost in runoff kasi nagkaroon ng alignment and alliances ng mga centrist and leftist party. Well, wala tayong runoff elections. This is it. It's a one-off. So are we going to see for the first time maybe some of the candidates saying, well, kaysa pilitin natin to, maybe let's put our bully pulpit behind the candidate that is most like-minded and most competitive among us.
Yeah.
And hindi ba yun ang sinabi ni Senator Lacson a few months ago? Di ba yun ang sinabi ni Senator Lacson, takpo tayong lahat and then titignan natin kung sino mas competitive sa atin,
Yes.
then dun tayo tataya. Well, we are already here, Senator Lacson. I think we're already in that phase and I think certain decisions have to be made. So let's say, for instance, again, this is completely hypothetical, if Senator Pacquiao withdraws, will he also openly come out and endorse another candidate? Let's say
Yeah,
Lenny,
but to that
with
point, Professor, I wanted to ask because on the one hand, it is also personality driven.
yes.
But does that necessarily mean that whether it's premature or whether it's fair or unfair, but if we start building scenarios about magpo-pull out tong kandidatong to, magpo-pull out tong kandidatong to, do they have endorsement power? Any of these candidates?
I don't have data on that, but I think, if you were, for instance, Lenny, you would hope that kung mag-withdraw yung ibang candidates, they will openly come out and support you. Because there's a possibility some of these candidates mag-withdraw, but their numbers will go to the other side,
Exactly.
not necessarily the opposition. For instance, my hunch, I don't have a data to back this up, but my hunch is, for instance, I think if Senator Lacson withdraws, my sense is he has more overlap perhaps with Bongo Marcos than with Isko. I feel that even more, but not necessarily with Pacquiao. My sense is with Pacquiao, perhaps Lenny could pick up more numbers than BBM. So it's not a straightforward issue na pag mag-withdraw yung iba, lahat pupunta kay Lenny or Bongo Marcos. And the other issue is, hindi ka lang pwede mag-withdraw. Dapat you go out and you endorse the other candidates. Act as a surrogate. So magiging dalawa yung difficulties dyan. Withdrawing itself and then coming out and endorsing a rival candidate. So that could also hurt you politically long term. Kaya nga, maintindihan ko kung hindi mag-withdraw yung ibang candidates. And at the same time, sinasabi ko dun sa iba, huwag kayo masyadong excited. Baka mag-withdraw yan, yung numbers na pupunta pa sa kabila, hindi sa side nyo. Because yun nga, as I said, the fluidity cuts in multiple ways. It's not necessarily in favor of one camp or the other. But now, because Bongo Marcos is the front runner, fluidity is fluidity is something he doesn't want. He wants certainty, right? And kaya nga, I think that's where we see his hesitance to engage in some of the platforms where he feels that he could be subjected to more uncertainty. And naintindihan ko po rin saan galing si Senator Marcos. Kasi yun nga, yung 2016, he was doing very well until February, right? And then sa March, especially in April, nakita natin Lenny came really from behind, no? And nag-pick up. So I think medyo, I don't want to use the word traumatized, but I'm sure the Marcoses did not forget that turn of events the last time. Kaya nga for them, fluidity is something that they don't want to hear at this point in time. They want to hear certainty and solidity.
Okay. Richard Herdarian, political scientist and columnist. Sir, maraming salamat po.
Thank you,
Sir,
Richard.
been a while. Salamat, Lucy.
Maraming salamat.
Ingat.
Salamat.
Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back.
Welcome back to Chiefs here on One News. And now joining us is Ana Marie Pamintuan of the Philippine Star. Ami, mukhang iniiskapan mo kami ba't late ka?
Ay,
Oo nga.
mahina ang ano nyo. Ayan na. Okay na. Okay na ba?
O, bakit ka raw late?
Pinunod ko lang yung pagsampal ni Will Smith kay Chris Pratt.
Akala ko na may scoop.
Akala ko nagre-rebat ka ng headline para bukas.
Politika, yun na lang ang
Iisip ko,
pinanood.
grabe, alas 9, nagre-remat pa siya. Malaki-laki siguro ang storya to. Baka bumaliktad si BBM, ganun.
Ako, yan ang malayo. Yan ang tatanong ko nga sana kanina kaya lang nawala yung guest natin.
But what's your big story tomorrow?
Well, maraming no? Yung balik muna tayo sa COVID muna.
Oh, sige.
Kapag hindi daw natuloy kapag daw nagka-expire yung mga bakuna natin hindi daw tayo pwedeng pumunta sa alert level 0, sabi ni Joey Concepcion. Kasi pinag-uusapan niya within the week we will know, di ba?
Grabe.
I don't get it. Pag mag-expire ang bakuna, hindi tayo babalik ng 0?
Hindi, kasi nga, ang baba ng vaccine rate. I mean, di ba? Kasi para raw, one of the requirements for them to lower it to 0 is a
higher
certain
vaccination.
percentage of herd immunity dapat, I mean, closer to it. So, nako.
Sila ngayon na nagkakalat nga sa ibang bansa, Shanghai is locking down the most extent.
Grabe, oo. Yeah.
Malapit-lapit.
South Korea, Hong Kong, grabe, no?
Kaya delikado or not check out of the woods.
Kaya pala, tatagal na mga order ko sa Lazada
Ano order mo?
But what about politics?
Sa politika.
Let us not despise the little things tonight. Ganon tayo ngayon. Kanina, ni Ami, sampal ni Will Smith. Ngayon naman Lazada ni Ed. Ano pa?
Hindi, kaya bago tayo malihis ng todo, lalo, ang daming mga insights kanina si Richard Herdarian. Sa politika, Ami, ano bang mga binabantayan nyo?
Walang paano? Yun nga, nabanggit niya na yung pagpunta mostly papunta na kay VP Lenny nga, no? Kaya masasaya siyempre yung mga kakampings. Kaya lang, mukhang walang balak yung ibang mga kandidato lahat. Sinasabi nila, wala kaming balak mag-drop out or mag-consolidate or whatever.
Although maaga pa naman, you still have a month and a half to go. But then again, you're looking at what? How many provinces all? No, 80 plus provinces. So what we've seen so far is just a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, but I think the crucial thing is, on the one hand, between the rallies that have really been, quite malaki yung visual impact, di ba? Or if not the emotional impact. That, and then these pieces of, lumipat tong politika, at least you have something from the opposition side na pwede nilang pagkapitan as a narrative.
Yeah.
Kesa naman yung...
Traction
Kesa naman yung... Kasi on the other side of that, hindi sila pwede kumapit sa survey Di ba? Tuwing lumalabas yung survey, it's always been a dampener. At least you have a couple of things that you can hang on to kahit papaano.
Photos are much more visually attractive than numbers.
Pero na-intriga rin ako sa sinabi ni Richard Herdarian. Di ba? Parang sabi niya, and that's true. Kumbaga, let's be blunt. Yung mga politiko naman sa local, di naman yun babalimbing ng
wala lang.
Wala
lang.
Not because of pure altruism.
Some might, let's give them the benefit, but the bottom line is, meron silang, as he put it, maybe they know something that we don't know. And that's what's intriguing about what's happening at the local levels.
Or maybe they had a bad experience with, di ba, the team that they used to support. Usually, ganun yun, bad blood Di ba? So, biglang ilipat.
I suppose a good example there is Ben Abadon Dating reporter yan. Tsaka dating activist yan
right.
So, baka meron siyang, he may have his reasons for not supporting BBM.
That's true. And I also asked that, the last time, di ba, nakausap natin si Pantaleon Alvarez. I went back to something that Joey Salceda said, because si Congressman Salcedo talagang he was open from the very start, di ba? Umiiling-iling talaga siya dati nung sinabi, oh, what about Sara Duterte partnering with Bongbong Marcos? And he goes back to his student activist days. And sinabi niya, alam ko
Yeah.
naman, mahirap lunukin yan para sa mga kung saan tayo nanggaling.
Ah.
Di ba? So,
Right,
who knows?
yeah.
Maybe it's a real factor for some politicians, at least some politicians of a particular generation.
And a particular frame of mind.
Yeah, particular frame of mind.
Yung support kay Bongbong Marcos, malaki din ang role ng local governments. Ha? Kasi yung mga kakampi din ni President Duterte, malakas sila sa local. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons kaya nanalo si Bongo. Diba? Talagang nakakapan siya ng husto ng local governments. Yung merong order yan. Although, at this point, no, matatapos na yung term ni Presidente, I don't know kung gaano pa kalakas yung clout na yun.
No, but speaking of President Duterte, Ami, baka yung mga correspondent nyo, mayroon ding mga chismis o balita dyan. What's up with President Duterte? Everybody saying, oh, ito na, mag-i-endorse na siguro. Pero bakit wala pa rin endorsement?
Yun nga balitan. Di ba, naiinis hanggang ngayon, naiinis pa yata na yun ang sinundan ng anak niya. Well, that's the story anyway. Maraming storya. Naiinis siya ng sinundan ng anak niya. Yung kampo ni Bongbong, imbis na siya. Di ba, remember, sinasabing, even Malacanang said na may dalawang senaryo siyang prinsinta kay Sara, both rejected, di ba? Kaya hindi din natin, baka hanggang ngayon naiinis. Although anything can happen, he can still endorse.
Kasi umaasa pa rin si Baste na he sees, by the way, he reads the writing on the wall daw, si Tatay Diggs will endorse Bongbong. But that's Baste.
Well, hindi. Tsaka malaking bagay yung nagpunta sa palasyo, di ba? At nag-usap. I mean, kahit na anong sabihin mo, yung optics nun, medyo malakas, di ba? Parang siya na. So, yun rin ang sinasabi ni Baste, di ba? Na nakita naman natin, nag-usap na. So,
yes, exactly. Of course, on the other side of this is nasanay na rin tayo sa Malacanang, particularly kay President Duterte. Ilang chapters na rin yan, di ba? Yung pagkahaba-haba ng prosesyon sa simbahan din ang tuloy. Parang usually, the early speculations have all turned out to be so far in the end correct. Di ba?
Yeah, correct.
Lalo na kung lumalakas nga si VP Lenny ngayon, and baka kailanganin ng konting push yung team ng anak niya, no? After all, it's the daughter.
That's true.
Oo, ang nagdadala also.
Kailangan ng boost from the president himself.
That's true. You may want to play that card pagka kailangan na talaga yung impact. Anyway, sige, we'll take another break. Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back.
Hello, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, sir. Thank you for joining us. Sorry for the last minute, ano.
Yes.
And now joining us on the line is Professor Dindo Manhit, Stratbase Group founder and managing director. Sir, thank you for joining us and welcome back to the Chiefs.
Good evening, Ed. Good evening to all your televiewers.
Hi, sir. Sir, well, we have seen some changes in alliances in the last week. We've seen the Barzagas, the Uys, and the Everdones, and also Reforma. Very quickly lang, are these shifts politically significant or are they isolated? Are we reading too much into them already?
With different political leaders of different areas, provinces, which could deliver votes, this type of shifts can create a momentum and a bandwagon for a certain candidate. In this case, it's VP Leni Robredo. So you are hoping that there will be more of this shift that will benefit their campaign and create that bandwagon for more support.
Dati na sa mga surveys, ang support for Bongbong Marcos ay mga kalahati lang actually yung solid and the rest is soft, no? May pag-asa ba talaga yan na matutuloy-tuloy kaya yan? Will the momentum be sustained? Kasi of course, the camp of the frontrunner is saying, game over na, wala na yan. Nag-hallucinate lang kayo na matutuloy pa yan. What do you say about those observations?
It's important to take note that the energy of the campaign of VP Leni can really turn into a momentum, can bring about certain moves, certain number change. That's why if we see a number hitting in the mid-20s at the end of March, as we saw it steady, and on the part of President of Marcos Jr., going down more, he was 46 with social weather station at the end of February. Then you see a momentum building up. Is there enough time? That's really the challenge. I think some of these local political leaders are feeling it also in their area. We all need to remember that VP Leni Robredo was able to build relationship with a lot of these local political leaders because she spent some time in the House of Representatives. So these are just allies in the past, maybe going back to support her, just how they supported her in the 2016 election. But is it enough? It remains to be seen. We need to continue to see, Amy, that all these political leaders are shifting to her, or majority of some of the key political leaders are slowly shifting to her.
Paano kung i-endorse ni President Duterte si Bongbong Marcos? Gaano kalakas yung endorsement power na yun?
For me, I think the strength of Marcos Jr. really is the consolidation of both forces of Duterte and the Marcoses. So there will be no additional numbers because I think the followers of Duterte know that with Sara Duterte and Marcos building this slate that at the core of it is so-called unity, that's really a unity between the Marcos and Duterte. So there's no value anymore for that, additional value.
How much stock should we put on the surveys that are yet to come? Ano ba talaga yon? I mean, will they be, sabihin na natin, no, talagang will they cement whatever outcome they show, is that something that will still be changeable, given that we only have a little over a month before elections?
The only difference really that is hard, Lucy, to answer is it has always been changeable. It could also always shift. The difference is the big gap. That is
Yeah,
really,
now,
is there
right,
enough,
yes.
Is there enough time for that gap? The change, we have seen that. Duterte taking over the lead late April, just the right time. But there was a smaller gap, a little
Yes,
less than 10%. So that kind of gap is really the challenge. If I will follow a number 46 to 18, 46 to 17 number, that's a big gap to catch. But there's energy that you see. We all see this energy. We see this local political leaders shifting and risking it. Maybe they're seeing something in their own area, but for me, it's really the time element now. We need more energy on the part of the volunteers of VP Len to knock on doors and convert voters and really generate more support locally as we have entered the local campaign.
What about debates? May power pa rin ba yun to, to change people's minds? How
Sorry,
important
the debate?
are
The
debates at this point?
The debate, Lucy? Yeah, the debates are important if the sponsor, COMELEC, and their media partners emphasize. So there's a candidate who's not showing up, who's not ready to face the question with regard to what are his real plans? What are the programs that he's offering? How does he stand on certain issues? I think we need
May
to also
impact
focus
talaga?
the debate.
May impact ba talaga?
There is an impact if we put the non-appearance of a candidate, especially a leading candidate, as an issue. But then if we will allow 9 candidates fighting for percentages in the polls, trying to hit each other, trying to outlast, and allowing the leading candidate not to be challenged, why is he not? So that becomes, then the debates become irrelevant because it focuses on number 2, number 3, number 4, up to number 9 in the survey.
You think there's still a chance na magko-consolidate some of the presidential aspirants will drop out and support a common candidate? Kasi ito yung suggestion ni nagkamali ako last week, si Rizalito David pala nagsabi nun. Sabi niya, di ba? It makes sense, kaya lang will it happen?
It makes sense, and there's no reason it should not happen unless you're being motivated to break the votes instead of really standing up for the key issues which are very important. Would we like the leading candidate to win? And the only way to counter him, because they found unity between the Marcoses and the Duterte. So if you're the other side, you have to find unity. And at this time, I remember statement in one of the discussions, October, September last year, whereby when you look at the numbers of April, whoever is leading should be the one to whom everybody should consolidate. And I think that's the message also for David when he raised that among vice presidential candidates.
But will their followers follow the candidate that they will give way to or give way for?
There's a possibility. We have what we call diffusion analysis, whereby where the votes will come from. So at times, maybe half of their votes will go to a specific candidate to whom they unify. But what makes it different is that if those candidates start going out and campaigning for the candidate that they choose to lead, that means focus on where they are strong geographically and campaign them. Pacquiao campaigning in Mindanao, maybe in Mega Manila area is Anisco Moreno. So that could be a boost.
Okay, Professor Dean Dumanhit, maraming salamat po.
Salamat
Thank you,
sa pagkakataon ko.
Thanks,
sir.
Prof.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you again to Professor Dean Dumanhit, Professor Ed Montaya was supposed to be a guest as well in the second half of the show. However, he was not able to join us due to technical difficulties. And that's all for this edition of the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to our viewers, mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
I'm Mami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez, News 5.
I'm Ed Lingao, and we are One News.